In 2017, I saw a few movies in the cinema. Some were great, and others were not so great. If I were to cherry pick a few examples, they would be Your Name, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and my personal favourite movie I saw in the cinema, Moana. And don't worry, I'm not going to give synopses of all of these different movies. That's not what this video essay thing, whatever this is about. But I will make a suggestion to say that you should go and watch Your Name if you haven't, because it was recently added onto the UK Netflix, at least, and it is stunning and so emotionally heart-wrenching, and when I saw it, I cried so hard. So hard. It's a great movie. It's so good. But why am I bringing these up? Why am I bringing all of these movies up? What do they have in common, if anything? Well, truth be told, I can't watch these movies without risking a panic attack. I can't. And it's weird, right? That I can sit down and engage with a show like Einstein on the Beach, for example, which, although a beautiful show, is definitely known, infamous even, for being alienating to most audiences. Yet I cannot sit down for 90 minutes and watch a Disney movie? Something's not right there. Well, like the title of this essay suggests, I cannot watch this movie, I cannot appreciate Lin-Manuel Miranda's wonderful film score, or the beautiful visuals, or Auli E. Carvalho's stunning vocals, or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson being a literal god, because of the person I initially saw the movie with. I saw the movie with an ex on his birthday. That's some good choices right there. And as such, the movie is somewhat tainted for me. I'm forever plagued by the initial viewing, and every subsequent time he would come up to me and sing "Shiny" at me, which I'm assuming he thought was an adequate substitution for humour, intelligent conversation, and, you know, empathy towards other people. I can't be the only one who has this issue, right? Well, that's what I thought when I came up with this video essay. On a plane. Travelling home in the middle of a pandemic. God, this year just keeps getting worse, doesn't it? It just every week it's a new thing. What a year to be alive. I wanted to know why I have these associations. Why every movie, TV show, video game, or even play that I engage with, I associate with the people and the places that I saw them with and at. Why the emotions of the initial viewing seep into every subsequent one. I thought I should make a disclaimer before we begin. I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. Psychologist? No, I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist either. I'm not a neurosurgeon. I'm not a neuroscientist. I am a musical theatre performer. Yes. And I just have a lot of time on my hands. And with that time, I thought that I would Google how the brain works and understand it, because everyone knows how that works, and that's an easy concept to discuss in a video. Memory is, in a word, complicated. We still don't have a full grasp of how everything works, because the brain is a big ball of wibbly-wobbly neurons firing electrical currents for every thought and movement we make. The brain is a vastly complex computer that we have in our bodies all the time. It's so cool. and it's something that I've always been fascinated by. And as such, I have Googled it, and I have gotten some expert opinions, and this is going to be I'm going to give a very brief overview of different parts of the brain and what they do and how they relate to memory and how memory works. And I have done it through animation.
Well, this is a brain, and there are lots of different components that make it. Taken from the American Association of Neurological Surgeons website, the brain is made up of two different types of cells, neurons and glial cells, also known as neuroglia or glia. The neuron is responsible for sending and receiving nerve impulses or signals. The main section of the brain, also known as the cerebrum, can be split into two hemispheres, known commonly as left and right. Both of these hemispheres are responsible for different tasks and are joined by the corpus callosum. This is how information is able to be passed from hemisphere to hemisphere. The brain can also be split into sections or lobes if you look at it from a horizontal perspective rather than a bird's eye perspective. There are 4 types of lobes, 2 of each, 1 for each hemisphere. So the first type of lobe are the frontal lobes, and they are responsible for motor skills. Within these, you also have the prefrontal cortex, which plays an important part in memory, intelligence, concentration, temper, and personality. Next, you have the occipital lobes, which allow us to process visual information like colours and shapes. The temporal lobes allow for visual memory and helps humans recognize objects and people's faces. They also help with verbal memory and help humans remember and understand language. The rear of the temporal lobe enables humans to interpret other people's emotions and reactions, and that's a pretty cool thing that the brain can do. And then lastly, we have the parietal lobes, which interpret simultaneously signals received from other areas of the brain, such as vision, hearing, motor, sensory, and memory. Along with these sections, there are also smaller parts like the hippocampus and the amygdala. Without the hippocampus, we wouldn't be able to remember new information. And without the amygdala, we wouldn't be able to regulate our emotional responses. There are also 12 nerves that start in the brain, but for the purposes of this essay, I'm only going to focus on more important ones. You have the olfactory, which is responsible for smell, the optic nerve, which is your visual fields and the ability to see, the trigeminal, which is facial sensation, the facial nerves, which is responsible for eyelid closing, facial expression, and taste sensation, the auditory/vestibular, which is responsible for hearing and also your sense of balance, and you also have the glossopharyngeal, which is your taste sensation and swallowing. Neurons in the brain are able to communicate and transmit information through a process called synaptic transmission. This is where neurons release specialized proteins called neurotransmitters that travel through the space connecting each other, called synapses, and bind to specific proteins called receptors. The way that memories are formed has to do with how often these neurons communicate with each other. The more they communicate, the stronger the bond. This process is called long-term potentiation and is widely regarded to be the foundation of memory storage. There are 3 stages for a memory to be properly formed. The first is encoding. This is where the brain takes in new information through sensory nerves like the olfactory and optic nerves and converts them into a compatible format for your brain to understand. Just like how a computer programmer or coder will take written language and turn it into a language that a computer can understand. This language, so to speak, is the previously mentioned proteins firing through the brain.
Oh, I should mention that in order for these initial sensory memories to take place, you kind of have to be paying attention first. That's kind of the give and take that we have to have in this kind of relationship. Who knew, right?
All these sensory experiences culminate in the hippocampus, where the brain starts the second stage, consolidation. The consolidation of memory is the key to ensuring a memory will not only be formed, but will be able to be retrieved later. You've probably heard the phrases short-term and long-term memory before. Well, as with most things in life, the brain is not quite as straightforward as that. Short-term memory defines anything from a few seconds to a few minutes of memory. The process cannot begin without the previously mentioned sensory memory. This usually lasts for a few seconds, until your brain can identify it. These sensory memories occur immediately after the brain encounters new information. Once neurotransmitters have travelled to the hippocampus, the seahorse of the brain, as you will, sorts the sensory memory into two categories, declarative memory and non-declarative memory. Declarative memory relates to facts, like names, places, and events, whereas non-declarative memory has more to do with life skills and long-term physical actions, like riding a bike, or reading, or being able to comprehend spoken language.
For the purposes of this essay, I am only going to be discussing declarative memory, because it's not like I haven't made this topic complicated enough.
The process to take a memory from the hippocampus and put it into long-term memory is relatively straightforward, if the sensory information is strong enough, or if it's repeated in the mind over the course of a couple of days, then it gets moved to the cortex and becomes long-term memory. Declarative and non-declarative memories get stored in different areas of the brain, which is why you'll forget what you ate for lunch last Wednesday, for example, but not how to read. Unless you're me, trying to read this script.
The third and final stage, which is arguably the most important one, is the retrieval of the memory. What's the point in having memories if you can't access them? In fact, there are many scientists who actually believe that a memory only becomes a memory once you remember it. And I could go into a whole philosophical debate about when is a memory not a memory, when it's a jar. I just want you to know that that's not improv. That's in the script. And I've edited this script. And I still thought that was appropriate. And funny.
The way that retrieval works is that something in your environment will trigger the synapses and receptors of a specific key identifier for an event, and the neurotransmitters will fire up, allowing you to recall that memory.
I'm sure many of you are sitting there at home going, that's all well and good, but I've just listened to a 6-minute spiel about how the brain works from someone who is very clearly not qualified to talk about it, and you have still not explained why you can't watch that stupid Disney movie. And to you, I have 2 points. 1, Moana is not stupid. Please watch your mouth. And 2, yeah, fair. That's a very fair, accurate statement that you have just made. Maybe someone with a neuroscience degree could have explained it a lot better and made it a lot less complicated, but since I'm not a neuroscientist, that's it. That's kind of what you get, I'm afraid. In the TED Talk, How Memories Form and How We Lose Them, Catherine Young writes, "Memories are encoded most strongly when we are paying attention, when we're deeply engaged, and when information is meaningful to us." This is also reiterated on human.memory.net, in which they write, "Emotion tends to increase attention, and the emotional element of an event is processed on an unconscious pathway in the brain leading to the amygdala. Only then are the actual sensations derived from an event processed." It is clear to see from these 2 quotes that our emotions and the environment we surround ourselves in have a direct impact to how we remember things. It's how, unless you have a superhuman memory, you never really remember the average days. And there's nothing bad about that. It's just that our brain wasn't stimulated enough to create enough receptors. However, you are more likely to remember a cool activity you did with your friends, or if you went sightseeing in a new city. Or on the opposite spectrum, you go on a disastrous date with an ex to watch a Disney movie on his birthday. Sure, there are pros and cons to this. As with everything, to be honest. If you have a bad experience, you might be haunted by the rock singing "You're Welcome" at night. But I posit to you that a good experience can actually leave a transformative effect on a movie or a show. October 2018, after we'd all finished singing at an open mic night, me and 4 other friends who were on my uni course got together, and since none of us had class the next day, we decided at 2 a.m. in a McDonald's to book an impromptu trip to London to see the newly revived company on the West End. So, we booked the tickets and a megabus to leave Liverpool Station at 5 a.m. that night. And with that in mind, we went back to our flats and had a quick, half an hour nap and took taxis to go down to the bus station. And we got on the bus, and as you can imagine, we're all pretty tired, barely conscious. And some of us slept. I didn't. I don't really sleep on buses. We arrived at Victoria bus station at around noon. We'd already planned to see company, but that was at 7:30, and we didn't have any plans for what we should do in the afternoon. With that in mind, we decided to go down to Leicester Square, I think it was, to see if we can haggle some matinee tickets. We headed down to the Underground and we found a ticket vendor, and he was selling tickets for Aladdin for a matinee show. And they were considerable amount of money. It was £35, $40-ish, for nosebleed seats, really bad seats. But, we figured it'd be fun, and we figured that a kids show would be a really palatable thing to do in the afternoon. So we had some lunch, and we headed down to the theatre. And the show was, in a word, awful. The lighting was just, way too bright and really lazy, and they clearly realized that Friend Like Me is one of the only moneymakers in the show, because they reprised it at every single opportunity they got. And not only that, but the girl who's playing Jasmine, and look, I don't want to spread any hate or spread any nastiness online, that's not what I'm about, but I feel like I need to say this, because the whole experience was very bizarre. The girl who was playing Jasmine, her diction was so bad that halfway through her, first song, I turned to my friend and went, "Is she actually speaking English?" I was convinced that Disney had done something really cool and, translated part of the show into, Urdu or Arabic. I was really hyped for it. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know Disney did this. This is so cool of them. Nope, she just wasn't saying words properly. I feel so mean. I feel really mean. I was so devastated that I'd spent so much money on what felt like a glorified pantomime. It even came with a bunch of screaming, school children who had come on a school trip, who had just, before they'd gotten into the theatre, decided that none of them were going to behave properly and were heckling the actors, and I felt so bad for them. And after we watched that disastrous event, I guess we could call it that, we sped down to the Gelgood Theatre to see what we'd travelled so far to see. And it was incredible. The lighting compared to Aladdin felt so fresh and new. The set comprised of these, moving cubes, I want to say, and each of the rooms were in the cubes and they moved around, and it meant that there were seamless scene transitions. And with that, you also felt the claustrophobia that Bobby felt from the constant pressure from her friends to settle down and start a family. It was so clever and nuanced in the ways that it tackled issues that modern women go through, recontextualizing a role that had become outdated as family ideals had evolved through the decades. The show was no longer a period piece, No longer a snapshot of life in the 70s, but rather a fresh look at how women nowadays are constantly scrutinized by their friends and family for not being a housework and baby machine. And I fell in love. There's kind of a large detail that I have yet to tell you so far. I was really sick that day. Like, so unbelievably sick. The night before, I'd felt like a little tickle in the back of my throat, but the lack of sleep obviously had a massive effect on me, because by the time I'd gotten to London Victoria bus station, I had turned into, like, a catastrophic flu-y mess. It was just a nightmare. However, I had already spent so much money that I couldn't really afford to just book a train ticket back home. And I just thought, why not just stick it out? So, that's what I did. To put it into perspective how ill I was, by the time we got to 7 o'clock and we got to the box office, the lady couldn't understand me. Not because I was coughing or anything, but I had lost all control over my larynx, and I couldn't make any sound at all. Like nothing, like not even whispering. So my friend had to give all my details to them. And what ended up happening is that during the show, like, I had a really bad cough. Like, I'd start coughing and wouldn't stop for like 20-30 seconds straight. So what I would end up doing is I would hold it in as much as possible until like people started clapping at the end of songs and stuff, and I would duck under my seat and just unleash this just, oh, it just makes me feel ill just thinking about it. It was so bad. But, you know, you get through it. My point is this. Context is everything. I thought Company was phenomenal. I was filled with so much elation watching the show. Was the show really that good? 2 different professors I've had from 2 separate universities on 2 different continents both saw the show. One of them said that the portrayal of Bobby as an alcoholic really ruined the show for her. And the second genuinely said that it was the worst professional show he'd seen in a decade. And here's the thing, you know, both of those opinions are perfectly valid. You know, I kind of agree with the first one and begrudgingly accept the second one. But it did cause me to reevaluate how I viewed the show. In reality, there are many factors that went into me seeing the show with such fondness. My lack of sleep, my semi-lucidity from my illness, or the fact that I'd just seen possibly one of the worst professional shows I'd seen at that point. Ironically, about 2 weeks after this, I saw 2 of the worst shows I think I could possibly ever see, back to back. Like, pretty much one day after another. So, you know, now, I don't think Aladdin is that bad. I wouldn't pay money to see it again, but, you know, it's not as bad as I thought it was. In actuality, all of these factors play into how receptive I was and how I interpreted what was happening on stage. And upon reflection, there are aspects of the show that I didn't enjoy. I maintain the opinion that no film or show is without fault and should never be heralded as such. I'll say it. I wasn't a massive fan of Patti LuPone's performance in it. I love her as a person, I do. However, when I saw her in Company, it felt like she phoned it in a little bit. And if I'm paying a lot of money to see a show, regardless of the day of week I'm seeing it on, I would kind of like a little effort. But maybe that's just me. I also, like, the gender bending of Bobby is important, and it needs to happen. However, I didn't like how, because they gender bent Bobby, it meant that they had to gender bend her lovers. Apparently, the West End isn't ready for a lesbian having a midlife crisis. You know, there also could have been a mix of people of all genders. But then, that's kinda by women not being able to make choices, and that's another can of worms, isn't it? Truthfully, when I look back on that day, I don't remember the shows too well. I see, like, scenes, sure, that were kind of memorable, but what really sticks out in my head is the people I saw it with, is the experience. I remember the memes and the jokes and the laughter and just being able to spend time with people that I care about. And that's what I take away from this. And I honestly don't think I would have enjoyed company without the company I saw it with. As young states, we remember best when information is meaningful. Not only that, but the previously mentioned friend who proofread all of my brain and memory sections, gave me some fun facts as well. And one of them was that the amygdala and the hippocampus have reciprocal connections. What that means is that how we process emotions has a direct correlation to how or even if we remember an event. So it's not hard to hypothesize that our emotions affect how we perceive and receive a piece of media. The issue then becomes, however, what happens if you have an event, an experience, that should have theoretically been amazing, but was ruined by the people you experienced it with? How do you remove them from that situation? Can you even remove them from that situation? It's the question that sparked this quest for knowledge. And like I've said before, the brain is weird and wonderful. And as great as it is at remembering, the art of forgetting is also something that it has somewhat perfected. Forgetting is actually as equally as important as remembering is. It allows the brain to filter out useless or outdated or incorrect information. And it could be the key. Finally, I might be able to enjoy Moana without any more stresses. And maybe it could help you too. Who knows?
Three types of forgetting that the brain is capable of. The first is passive obsolescence. This is where, over time, the brain forgets details that initially activated your sensory memory. So that could be anything from the chirping of birds or the specific colour of a flower on a walk to the rustling of popcorn behind you at the cinema. What this means is that there is less sensory information connected to a memory, meaning you become less and less likely to trigger it over time. The second type is targeted forgetting. This is where the brain gets rid of any information from your day-to-day life that wasn't useful, or you found out was wrong, or just wasn't interesting enough for you to create lasting receptors. It's like your brain emptying out its recycling bin on its desktop. Routine, but not very engaging. It also generally happens when you're asleep, when the brain has time to do its thing without you interrupting it. It is a necessary process that allows you to free up your brain for more useful information. The third is called motivated forgetting. In the journal Neural Mechanisms of Motivated Forgetting, Anderson and Hanselmeyer describe this as increased forgetting arising from active processes that down-prioritize unwanted experiences in service of creating or sustaining an emotional or cognitive state. Simply put, in order to try and protect our mental and even physical health from a traumatic event, our brain can specifically target memories and block them out.
This does seem like the obvious choice, doesn't it? Maybe this will allow us to finally watch Disney movies in peace. The only issue with it is that motivated forgetting is kind of hard to control. It's a defense mechanism that the brain has created in order to protect our psyche from truly traumatic events. And as much as I really, really hate my ex and that entire relationship, watching Moana with him doesn't really count. It doesn't count as being truly traumatic, and I can accept that. Remember way back in the video when I was talking about memory? Well, the third stage is called retrieval, right? A memory is only a memory once you remember it, and all that. So what if you could interrupt the retrieval process? Well, specifically, you could reroute the brain into remembering something else. In Neural Mechanisms of Motivating Forgetting, the authors state, one's disposition towards a memory affects how well it is retained. Reminders enhance retention when a person is well disposed towards a memory, but when one has motivations for excluding a memory from awareness, retrieval can be stopped, preventing the benefits of retrieval and further disrupting a memory. This essentially means that instead of forgetting the memory 100%, basically what you're doing is you're not allowing the brain to access it properly. And you can almost override it for something more enjoyable, something that you're more disposed towards. And simultaneously, you'd also make it harder for you to access the initial memory. Now, obviously, I am not suggesting that someone who has undergone deep, traumatic, heartbreaking events should go and do this. In this situation, I would definitely advise for professional help. Please get professional help. But I thought this would be a fun thing to explore.
There have been a few studies conducted over rewriting a memory. I found an interesting one in a National Geographic article where two people leading the experiment, Chan and LaPaglia, got a group of people to watch the pilot of 24, and then would feed them misleading information about the episode they just watched, to see if they could remember the real answer or were persuaded to agree with the fake one. However, this turned out to not really help my discoveries, because in the actual study it states very strong memories are resistant to post-reactivation amnesic treatments.
This is obviously information that I did not want to hear. And I kind of felt stumped. I felt really, really bad, honestly. I felt so lost because I'd spent all of this time working towards an essay that kind of seemed like it was going nowhere. And none of my answers matched up with anything. And with a heavy heart, I did what I normally do and fell into the arms of YouTube. It's Okay to Be Smart has a video called How Your Memory Works, and it was honestly one of the first resources that I used when I was first just researching how your brain and memory works. It's kind of a fitting title. When mentioning passive obsolescence, the speaker talks about the idea that when neurons get used and reused for different memories, it can actually disrupt the original memory. And that was like a huge neon sign that just lit up in my brain. What if you could cheat passive obsolescence and reassign neurons dedicated to a certain memory? But how would you do that? I don't know. But I have a theory. If memories are triggered by sensory information, the same sensory information that kickstarts the whole memory-making process and creates synaptic transmission and creates receptors, I'm going to assume that watching a movie will stimulate a lot of those similar sensory information, right? So wouldn't that create stronger bonds and stronger receptors? So in theory, the actual movie becomes stronger in your mind whereas the surrounding information and the environmental information maybe doesn't become as vivid. Storm and Levi actually share a similar viewpoint on this, as they state, even if a target item is strongly associated to a given cue, if other items are strongly associated to that cue, the target item will be difficult to retrieve. Obviously, I'd have to test this out. But how would I do that? Now, I know this sounds kind of ridiculous, but hear me out. My plan for being able to watch Moana is to watch it over and over again. And now, maybe, if I was a true scientist, I'd set up an experiment where I watched the movie every day for 2 weeks on repeat, for example, and I calculated my findings to see if I'd still have the will to live, if my emotions for the film had grown fonder, or if I'd descended into complete and utter despair because the movie is forever cemented with memories of my ex. However, I'm not going to do that. I barely have the constitution to sit down and watch a 90-minute movie full stop, let alone on repeat. Plus, I don't have Disney Plus, and I'd have to go out and buy the movie, and that's a whole lot of effort that I don't want to go through. And you know, I do important things. That experiment wouldn't prove anything, really. Sure, it might make my memory of the movie stronger, but it wouldn't do anything to remove the negative associations I have with the film. Because I don't know if any of you guys have been made aware, we're kind of out of commission as a planet right now. And I have a lot of feelings all the time, but none of them I'd really describe as being happy. And surely if I just watch the movie in this state, it's just gonna add to the negativity I associate with the film. This isn't gonna be like a here's one I made earlier kind of reveal, but I have actually watched Moana since its release. I've watched it a couple times, in fact. Most notably, I saw it at my friend's house. And this viewing at my friend's house is what has allowed me to reevaluate how I respond to the film, because I now have a new context. Let me set the scene for said context. Imagine your last day of freedom. March 2020. I was an exchange student. I was an exchange student in America, in fact. And my university had just announced that they would be closing their doors for 2 weeks in order to do a full, deep clean of everything. And they told all of the students to go home. And they told international students that if they could, they should go home with a friend so that they can obviously come back in 2 weeks, because classes are starting up in 2 weeks, obviously. That completely happened. And I loved my university and my experience there. About 19 different people genuinely opened their houses to me and gave me an invitation to stay. And it was honestly one of the most heartwarming things that has ever happened to me. I decided to go with my friend David. We were pretty close, and we had been in a show the semester before together, and it just seemed like the right thing to do. So without knowing what my future held or anything, I packed up half of my life into one suitcase, and we drove 8 hours to Albuquerque. And I honestly cannot thank him or his family enough. Those 2 weeks were some of the most stressful I've ever had in my life. Every day I was on the phone to the embassy or the airline, or I was emailing my university back home for advice, all with basically no payoff. And as such, I wasn't always the most receptive or courteous house guest. I deeply regret that, genuinely. Like, every day I regret that. But they remained calm and understanding, and I'm so grateful for it. On one of the days, I discovered that they had Disney Plus, and upon my perusal of the site, I found Moana. And I was just emotionally vulnerable enough to think maybe this time I'll enjoy it. And surprisingly, I did. And here's the thing. Sure, some of the scenes were difficult to sit through. The Tamatoa scene in particular, although arguably the funniest part of the movie, made me feel physically sick with how much I associate that scene with that mess. Afterwards, now, for instance, the cinema on that cold January day feels somewhat faded. Sure, the rest of that day is as awful and vivid as I remember it, but now at least I have a little island of joy that I can just ram into that memory. And just something good to remind myself that life isn't always that bad. When I think of the film now, I think about eating snacks in the middle of the couch with a blanket on and laughing with a friend. And deserts. Oh my god, deserts are so cool. I didn't know I was missing out on deserts. So lit. Maybe the first memory will never truly go away. But if I can overload my brain with more and more positive experiences, I'll count that as a win. Even if I have to skip through shiny every time I do it. Memories are heavily influenced by the amygdala and how we're feeling. So, if every time I watch a movie, I watch it with people that I love and care about, I'll have experiences that will stick with me forever. And I'll have less and less cause to ever think about that freezing January day. And I know the past few months have been really hard on everybody. Some of you may have lost loved ones, or lost your job, or have just spent the past few months in complete isolation. But when this is over, I highly recommend that you reach out to those you care about and those you are close to. Set up a film night extravaganza in a garden, or try a socially distanced date, or even go out and experience the local flora and fauna, for example. Fill your memories with rich and meaningful experiences so that in the coming years, when you look back on the hellscape that is 2020, you can find some islands of joy. Hey guys, I'm really happy you made it to the end of the video. Good for you. I know a lot of that information was a lot, and it's okay if you didn't really take a lot of it in. It's fine, I'll live. I really hope you enjoyed it. This is the first kind of long form video that I've ever really done, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope to make more if people are interested. I have a few ideas in the works actually at the moment, and if you want to hear about updates as they come, or you want to help support me, I have a link to my Patreon in the description. I also have a link to my bibliography. I've not written it yet, so I might just post it, copy and paste it into the YouTube description box. I've not decided yet. Also, I would like to shout out my one and only Patreon user. It's my dad. We gotta love family support, don't we? But yeah, so like and subscribe, share this video around. If any of you are neuroscientists, I'd love for you to like comment in the description or comment in the comment section about the information I have, if it's possible. I really want to start an academic discourse. I really want my channel to be a warm and friendly place for knowledge, and I want it to be an inclusive place that people can come and feel safe. And that's what I'm aiming to create. So be nice, be good. I'll have some fun stuff coming in the future, hopefully.